We're the greatest Scottish army. We're going to Argentine, and we'll take it all up when we win the World Cup. Cause Scotland's the greatest football team. We can't lose the match. We can't lose at all. All the teams will have to fucking fall. You know that is true. Scotland's gonna do it. England just can't make it, and we'll make everyone blue. Oh, we're part of Ali's army. We are going to Argentine, and we'll shake them all up when we win the World Cup, because Scotland's the greatest football team. Yeah, right. Scotland, rubbish. Anyway, this version of Cutter's World Cup stories sees us go to England's rival, Scotland. I did, of course, the first look at the groups for 2026 in this series, and then I talked about the three co hosts: Mexico, America, Canada, and their World Cup histories and all that. I went a bit long on few. England, I went long last week. I know that because of my English love and all that. But today we're going to be looking at one of the greatest World Cup losers of all time. Now, no disrespect, but when you go to not one, not two, not three, but 8 World Cups and can't even make a bloody knockout game, then you're screwed. Although the new format in 2026 is going to give Scotland a golden chance to make it through as maybe top two or even third place. So we're going to be looking at Scotland's World Cup history and all the massive missteps along the way. So join me, why don't you? Express yourself. You just can't go wrong now. Express yourself. They need to know it. Express yourselves. It's never wrong if you can do it all the time. Soccer brings the world in motion, and Canada's a co host now. Soccer's got the world in motion. US and Mexico host too. Express yourself. It's one on one. Express yourself. 48 nations all. Express yourself. You can't go wrong because this might be the best World Cup ever. Soccer's got the world in motion. That I know it has to be true. Soccer is big sport, and some stories are here for you. So you heard me right, and you see the title if you are watching the on video. Scotland's World Cup history. Whoa, 8 appearances, 0 knockout games. Well, that's the stranger thing. We all know about Mexico losing the most games in the World Cup tournaments, but they've gone to knockout stages. Well, 1986, Negrete's scorpion kick. But anyway, yeah, Scotland shocked the world a few times and shocked themselves, obviously. So, yeah, they've been to 8 World Cups without a knockout game. They did not compete in the first 3 World Cup chances in 1930, 34, and 38. It was because of a dispute with FIFA over what they call broken time payments to players because, they were all working. The Scottish Football Association, alongside England, Ireland, and Wales, withdrew from FIFA in 1928 and didn't come back to 1946. Well, 1930 is kind of self-explanatory because the World Cup was in South America, and traveling to South America was a whole lot different 100 years ago than it is nowadays. So basically, England and Scotland didn't want to go through. Even in with the next 2 World Cups in Europe being in Italy and France, they didn't want to do anything about it. So anyway, it happened that way. So Scotland got it through 1946 alongside England and Wales and Northern Ireland. So the readmission meant that Scotland were now eligible to enter the 1950 World Cup. And FIFA actually said as a make do that the top 2 teams in the British home championship between Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England would get into the World Cup automatically. But the Scottish Football Association said we're not going anywhere unless we win the whole thing. Unfortunately for Scotland, they ended up losing to England 1-0. England were in, and so was Scotland. However, Scotland stood by this proclamation saying that we said and all that. Anyhow, Billy Wright and the other England players actually thought that Scotland should go to the World Cup alongside them, but nope, the FA said no. England, of course, fell to the Americans in the 1950 World Cup. The same qualification rules as in 1950 were in place for 1954. As you know, the home championship was a qualifying group. Scotland again finished second to England. However, this time Scotland decided to allow the team to participate in the tournament in Switzerland. However, as much as it was terrible. FIFA allowed 22 men squads. Scotland only sent 13 players, and 11 of them have to start, the 10 outfield players and the goalie. I don't know why and all that. They had a hardship in terms of players because of the money. However, the dignitaries traveled in numbers accompanied with their wives. Like, frig, you could have told a couple of dignitaries not to come, or a couple of their wives not to come. Well, the second option was terrible, but I'm just being honest. Anyway, Scotland fell to Austria 1-0, and then they played Uruguay, who had never lost a game at the World Cup up to 1954. Well, they only competed in 1930 and 1950. Of course, as I said, travel between the continents was harsh, and Uruguay couldn't do it. Uruguay were the reigning champs and crushed Scotland 7-0. In fact, Tommy Dockery said that they were shattered listening to the national anthem. And it also didn't help that Scotland decided to wear kits that had like a turtleneck on it, thinking that Switzerland's got cold weather. But Switzerland had triple-digit temperatures. Fortunately, though, Scotland did qualify for the 1958 World Cup in a qualifying group, not including the British teams, but basically that. They finished ahead of Spain. Matt Busby was supposed to be the manager for Scotland, and it looked good. And he was Manchester United's manager. But unfortunately, the Munich air disaster took a toll. Of course, when the Manchester United plane crashed, coming back from Yugoslavia. Busby stayed alive. He did have severe injuries, so Dawson Walker had to take charge of the team. Scotland tied Yugoslavia, and then they were to face Paraguay and all that. Paraguay was a rough fit and good team, according to Tommy Dockery. But the manager ignored this advice and let out some of the combative players. Scotland ended up losing 3-2. They fell to France, who went on to lose to Brazil in the semifinals, and that was it. Scotland kept trying. In 1962, they were tied for first in qualification group with the Czechs. Unfortunately, though, they had to play one game tiebreak, and the Czechs won after extra time. And to add salt to the wound, the Czechs did take second place in the World Cup, losing to Brazil. In 1966, they were drawn into a decent group and all that. Scotland had to beat Italy to qualify or tie to force into the playoffs. But unfortunately, due to injury, Scotland got their butts handed to them. Scotland were in a World Cup group in 1970, and they needed to tie West Germany. And then when Germany came to Scotland, Scotland just needed a tie. Unfortunately, they couldn't tie Germany. They lost 3-2. Fortunately, though, Scotland got into the 1974 World Cup in West Germany. So Scotland took on Zaire, which is now I always say that when I say DR Congo. It's the Democratic Republic of Congo, Brazil, and Yugoslavia. Scotland started off quite well with a win over Zaire 2-0. And, Joe Jordan scoring a goal. Remember that. They ended up tying Brazil and Yugoslavia, which is good. So 1 win, 2 ties. They're going to the next round, top 2 in the group. Wrongo. They didn't. Yugoslavia won the group, mostly by crushing Zaire like a grape 9-0. And Brazil beat Zaire 3-0 in the final game of the group stage, which meant that Scotland's 2-0 win was not enough, so they lost by 1 goal. They criticized how they wanted to retain possession instead of pressing for more goals against Zaire. Well, yes, Yugoslavia scored 9 on those guys. So Scotland needed Ally McLeod and all that. Scotland would qualify for the 78 World Cup, beating the Czechs and the Welsh. However, McLeod fueled the hopes of the nation by stating that Scotland will come home with a medal and all that. A massive send-off at Hampden Park happened and all that. It wasn't just the Scottish organization saying that they're going to win it. Rinus Michels, who was the winner, who was the Dutch head coach, said that Scotland could win the competition. So Scotland went on top of the pops with that song, Ally's Titan Army, which I tried to sing and I butchered it. So Scotland would take on Peru in the first game in Cordoba. So Scotland felt powerful, but Teofilo Cubillas scored 2 key goals, and Peru beat Scotland 3-1. Alan Rudd, the Scottish goalkeeper, even had something in the net with him, the cuddly stuffed lion that Blue Peter presented him. Unfortunately, before the second game, trouble started as Willie Johnston was sent home from the World Cup after failing a drugs test. So then Scotland took on Iran. Yes, Iran qualified for the 1978 World Cup. It's true. And they weren't as evil as they were and all that, that Iran hostage crisis. But anyway, Scotland took on Iran, and shockingly, Scotland tied Iran 1-1. They actually, Ally McLeod made some mistakes, picking inexperienced fullbacks on defense. So Scotland were in deep trouble. They lost and tied, and they were definitely not going to win the World Cup. They had to beat the Dutch by 3 clear goals to progress, so +3. The Dutch kind of did take it easy because with their 2 W's, they were in the next stage no matter what. So Scotland was playing a lesser Dutch team than you think. The Dutch actually scored 1-0, and then Kenny Dalglish and Archie Gemmill went to work. Gemmill's second goal was one of the greatest World Cup goals ever. Gemmill beat 3 Dutch defenders before lifting the ball over Youngblood into the net. It was a thing of beauty. Some ballet dancers even recreated Gemmill's steps and all that. It was amazing how it was working. Trouble was the Dutch scored a second goal. Scotland did beat the Dutch 3-2, but it was a lesser Dutch squad, and also Scotland only won by 1. So they were out on goal difference again. It was frustration and all that. I mean, yeah, you beat the Dutch, but you couldn't beat Peru or Iran. Yipes. The worst part was Scotland went out twice on goal differential at the same time as England could not make the World Cup. They missed 74 and 78, so they should have basically proven that, they were better than England. Kind of not. So Jock Stein became the manager for Scotland. They didn't make it to Euro in 1980. In 1982, there was a tough group. They had to deal with Sweden, Portugal, Israel, and Northern Ireland. But Scotland won the group. Northern Ireland also made it too, because remember, that was the year that they shocked Yugoslavia on a goal by Jerry Armstrong to make it to the next stage. So anyway, yeah, it was a tough group. Then they had what they called the group of death with New Zealand, Brazil, and the Soviets. So it's a thing and all that. So a lot of things happened in the group of death. They were dealing with New Zealand, Brazil, and the Soviets. When one look at it says that Brazil is, Brazil, they're great at the World Cup. The Soviets can produce, and New Zealand can be a shocker. So anyway, Scotland ended up beating New Zealand 5-2 in their first game. All right, so they beat them. But Brazil crushed them 4-1. Socrates, Seco, Eder, and Falcao helped out. So Scotland would have to face the Soviets with their tournament lives on the line. And unfortunately, a 2-2 tie meant nothing. However, what's even more terrible was that Alan Hansen and Willie Miller collided, chasing a ball, and the Soviets ran through and scored. Worst part is Scotland were again eliminated by goal differential to the Russians. Brazil definitely won the group. And it was actually said that if Scotland had shut out New Zealand, they were in on goal differential, not the Soviets. So there again, another terrible disaster against a team they should have beaten. 74, they should have crushed Zaire like a grape, like Yugoslavia did. 1978, they should have beaten Iran, if anything. And in 1982, they should have shut out those pesky Kiwis. Scotland would qualify for the 1986 World Cup, but in traumatic circumstances. Scotland needed to tie Wales at best, at worst, to progress to a playoff against Australia. Scotland got a penalty kick and tied it 1-1, which meant that Scotland were going to go to Australia. Unfortunately, though, Jock Stein suffered a heart attack during the celebrations and died in the dressing room. So Alex Ferguson, yes, that Alex Ferguson, would take over and all that. Scotland beat Australia in the two-leg playoff. They took on Uruguay, Denmark, and Germany. Uruguay, Denmark, Germany. So anyway, yeah. So Scotland only scored 1 point in 3 matches. They lost to the Danes, they lost to the Germans. They had to beat Uruguay to qualify. Unfortunately, Uruguay took care of Scotland. So anyway, with a tie. Well, Uruguay hacked down the Scottish players. They played foul. They managed to make it to the round of 16. Stupidity and fault. But don't you. So Ferguson sucked. And so Andy Roxburgh became the manager for the 1990 World Cup squad. Fergie would have his own problems as he was almost sacked from Manchester United in 1990, but won the FA Cup. Scotland qualified second in their qualifying group behind the Yugoslavs, but ahead of France, which was big. They were drawn with Costa Rica, Sweden, and Brazil. So, looking at it, I think Scotland had a chance to be top two. Costa Rica were supposed to be, the long shot. Sweden maybe beat them, and Brazil, well, it's Brazil. Scotland shocked themselves by losing 1-0 to Costa Rica in their opening match. Can you imagine losing to those guys? Seriously? And then they beat Sweden 2-1 like people kind of expected. So they needed to avoid defeat to Brazil. They just needed a tie. And it was 0-0 until the 80th minute when Jim Leighton, good goalie, fumbled the shot. Brazil scored 1-0 and Scotland were fucked. Scotland did not do well in 94 to qualify for the World Cup, so they were out of luck. Craig Brown came in and Scotland went to the 98 World Cup, which was their last World Cup before 2026. They were the best European runners-up, so they didn't have to go to a playoff. Scotland were drawn against Brazil for the 4th time in 8 World Cup groups appearances and faced the Brazilians. Scotland was tied 1-1, but unfortunately an own goal by Tom Boyd, who deflected the ball into his own net, made it 2-1 Brazil. Scotland tied Norway and then got whipped by Morocco, of all teams, 3-0. So Scotland were screwed. All that. So anyway, they almost qualified for Euro 2008, but failed. The Dutch screwed Scotland over in the qualification for 2010. Scotland were in trouble. Scotland in 2018 World Cup qualifications were drawn in the same group as England, facing them in a competitive fixture for the first time since 1999. How? I thought Scotland and England were supposed to play each other at least once every 5 years. England crushed them 3-0 in November, and the return match saw Scotland up 2-1, but in added time, Harry Kane tied it. They ended up tying Slovenia, and they were in trouble. They finished second in Group F of the 2022 World Cup qualification, but unfortunately, they lost to Ukraine in the what they call the playoff tournament. I don't know what they call it, but anyway, yeah, they lost to Ukraine at Hampton. In 2026, Scotland beat Denmark 4-2, meaning that they did qualify automatically. Yeah, they lost to Greece, but thankfully Denmark tied Belarus. So Scotland beat Denmark to qualify for the World Cup right off the bat, the first since 1998. So to recap, 1954 they were prepared for a Swiss cold weather, but it was hot weather and fell twice. 1958 they were in with every home nation, England, Northern Ireland, Wales, but they've crashed out, only getting 1 point. So did England. 1974, their next World Cup, they looked good. They won 1 and tied 2, but unfortunately, because they only won 2-0 against Zaire and Brazil won 3-0, they were screwed. 1978, they won over Holland, lost to Peru, and tied Iran. That Iran tie screwed them over 10 ways from sundown. 1982, they also won, lost, and tied. They beat New Zealand, they tied the Soviets, they lost to Brazil. But because they gave up those 2 meaningless goals to New Zealand, goal differential screwed them. 1986, they only had 1 point, which was a tie of Uruguay, who basically kicked them off the pitch. 1990, a win and 2 losses. They beat the team they weren't really supposed to beat, Sweden, and they lost to the team they should have beaten, Costa Rica. And then they lost to Brazil, but it's Brazil. In 98, they put up only 1 point, losing to Morocco. And that was just brutal and all that. However, now in the group stages, they may have a chance. They played 2 games at Foxborough, home to the New England Patriots, and 1 in Miami Gardens, home to the Dolphins. It works out because Foxborough's home to the Patriots, which is my team, and Miami Gardens is home to the Dolphins, my Uncle Finley's team is, and he's a big Scottish fan. They will face Haiti, so Scotland should be able to beat Haiti, making their second World Cup appearance. They made it in '74. They've had to face Morocco, who are not lightweights by any stretch of the imagination. I learned that the hard way. And they have to face Brazil last. Are you kidding me? For the 5th time in 9 World Cup group stages, they had to face those Brazilians. It's like, wine and cheese. Scotland and Brazil being in the same group. Jim Layden has 9 World Cup matches to his credit. He's number 1. Kenny Dalglish with 8. Joe Jordan with 7. Goal scorers. Well, Joe Jordan has 4 of them. Archie Gemmill with 2. Kenny Dalglish with 2. John Wark with 2. And 13 players have a goal. So that just tells you how good Scotland is or isn't. So, beating teams that you shouldn't really be beating and losing to teams that you should be beating just ruins it. And Scotland we're not the greatest football team. I'm sorry, but that's the way it goes. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond, and join me the next 3 videos in this list. We'll be talking about World Cup stories from days gone by. Next week, we'll be looking at all the World Cups from 1930 to 1966. 1 story per World Cup, and I will try to not overanalyze like I'm trying to do. I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.